Why do Americans work so much more than people in other rich countries? What does it actually mean to live a good life in society organized around work? My guest today is Dan Hamermesh, one of the most influential labor economists of the last 50 years. Dan's work has explored how we spend our time, discrimination, beauty premiums, and the economics of leisure. He has a rare ability to take everyday aspects of life that most people overlook and reveal the economic forces underneath them. Here's our talk. Welcome, Dan, to the economics of work. I think of you as one of the most expansive labor economists, really pioneering the field, getting into some interesting topics, time, beauty, discrimination. So it's a pleasure to have you and welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Cool. Okay. So I want to get into this question of leisure and work and sort of how those interact. So as you know, almost 100 years ago, John Maynard Keynes in 1930 published The Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren, where he predicted we'll be working 15-hour weeks in 100 years and otherwise living a life of leisure. Does he still have time? Is he right? Is he wrong? Where do we stand? How do you grade him?
On that one, I'd give him probably a D minus.
Wow, harsh. Okay.
Not an F, only because it takes guts to make predictions. Though it's easier to do it if you're not going to be alive to have your mistakes pointed out to you, which obviously he knew he wouldn't be. No, we're nowhere near that. In fact, it's really quite remarkable. And the US, by the way, is the worst culprit of this among rich countries. Heck, in the late 70s, we were in the middle of rich countries in terms of hours worked per year. Currently, we are the most hours worked per year. People don't realize that. Oh, Japanese work harder. No, they don't. They work less than we do. And the Central European countries, France, Germany, they work much, much less. And that's a change in 50 years. We haven't cut back in this country.
You say the worst. Is that a bad thing? Like, why do you think that is
Yes,
bad?
that's absolutely a bad thing for the
Okay.
following reason. The purpose of life, in my view, is to enjoy things. Very few people get pleasure out of their work time. I do, but I'm totally neurotic. I mean, I'm not even being paid for anything, but I still work half time. I would call it work, but for me, it's fun. But most people, that's not true at all. And so the question is, why are we doing this? And why are we so different from people in other countries?
Couldn't you make a case that there's some positive externality to a whole country working more? Because even if it is like worse for every individual person in terms of life satisfaction, we get some positive externalities. We can attract capital. The most innovative companies are formed in the most productive society. We lead interesting lives by being a productive society, right?
All that does is make us monetarily richer. I'm not saying cut back like crazy, but if
Yeah.
we cut back, let's say 20% work time, which my guess is would cut back the total amount we produce by about 10%, one for two, we'd still have real incomes that are higher than they were 15 years ago, 20 years ago, assuming a 1% real growth per year. I don't think people felt poor 20 years ago. Indeed, my guess is they feel poorer today because as America, remember, our national pastime is complaining. And people are complaining more now, even though the average person is better off than she or he was 20 years ago, and much better off than his or her grandparents were. It's also interesting the dimensions in which we do work more than other people. The average work week is the same here as it is in other rich countries, about 38 hours a week. The difference is we don't get vacations the way they do in other rich countries. The Australians have this wonderful 4 month sabbatical after 10 years of work. So while the work week is the same, we're working more weeks per year and we're working more days per week than other people are. This is not a way to live.
Yeah. The other thing I wanna hear your take on is that one way to think about it is we've got work and we've got leisure, and there's hours of work. But it seems like for you and me at least, and I wonder if this is happening in a more widespread way, the boundary between work and leisure seems to be blurring a little bit. We're not working in sweatshops to the same extent as we used to be. Work is getting social, at least white collar work, and we have networks, we have friends.
You're concentrating on people like you and me who are a rather small fraction of the workforce. The average clerk at Starbucks or any other retail does not enjoy this kind of life at all. The average person in an office, even in a manufacturing firm, the average healthcare worker, nurse, that's not the same thing that the average professor or attorney or doctor does. And I think those people living the kinds of lifestyles and work styles that you're talking about represent well below 20%. So when I see all this stuff
Yeah.
in the papers, the New York Times, for example, raving about this, they're catering to a rich audience, and that's not the average person.
I'm sure you're familiar with Claudia Golden's work on greedy work. This idea that there are some types of jobs where the returns to the 60th hour during the week are much higher than the returns to the 30th hour during the week, where there's a huge economic advantage to being on all the time, to dreaming about work when you go to sleep.
I think Claudia is quite wrong. I think what she's missing is that basically it's a rat race.
You
Okay.
think so?
I'm working hard to demonstrate to my superiors, or to first possibly demonstrate to my superiors that I'm the best guy to be promoted and to get a big raise, or simply that I enjoy it more than other people. But I think she's quite wrong on that. There are very few jobs, including even professoring, where working the 60th hour is more valuable than the 40th. Question, what would you do with your time if you had it? Keynes talked about how people would be doing all kinds of wonderfully beneficial things. We actually have data on two countries where they essentially cut back hours of work, Japan and Korea. And the Koreans, the men spent about half the extra time grooming themselves, more
Yeah,
time.
I saw that result and I didn't really know what to make of it. That's
Oh,
just
I
like
could spend a
shaving
lot of
or
time grooming my beard, putting facial stuff on the beard. The
yeah,
Japanese spent more time, and this is more sensible, watching television, which
yeah.
we know from recessions, TV watching goes up, sleep goes up. Sleep and television watching are the default items. We know, for example, if you have a disability and you have to cut back on work, a large fraction of the time is taken up sitting in front of the tube or sleeping. And, I don't think even Keynes would view those as the most morally desirable activity, certainly not television.
Yeah, you can make the case it's even worse. I mean, there's a lot of kind of negative outcomes from being engaged heavily on social media. If someone's just doom scrolling on TikTok or Instagram, that could be harmful to their mental health. And if that's how we spend our leisure, that sounds pretty bad.
It does. But on the other hand, I
Yeah,
don't think if they were doing that, they'd be doing such wonderful things. Most of them would not be out there doing volunteer work, delivering food to poor
sure.
people, or writing poetry, which I think Keynes had might have had in mind. So,
Yeah.
no, I mean, I know. I mean, so I'm not that bothered about 15 hours, but I sure would like to see us cut back somewhat. We also know that the having leisure bunched and spending time at the same time other people have leisure, these are the positive externalities you're talking about, is really important.
Yeah,
I
right. I
think
mean
that,
that's
again,
where
it's
I
not
get so
just cutting hours, which I'm all for, cutting work hours. It's also how we do it. And the way to do
yeah.
it, in my mind, is not cutting the work week, which ain't that long, but rather allowing more paid vacations. Most countries have huge paid vacations, huge amounts of paid holidays. And we have half the people have no paid vacation at all in this country, which is just crazy.
So do you think that will change? And if it changes, do you think it will be a result of policy or AI,
Well,
technology?
I think if anything, it'll have to be policy. I mean, I don't think we have evidence when a lot of jobs were destroyed by the introduction of PCs that it wasn't an example of suddenly people getting more leisure. They wound up doing other things. Those who would have been secretaries fell by about 30% between 85 and now. And, I mean, are those people out there now working much less, spending their time writing poetry, even watching TV? Heck, no, they're not at all. So, no, it
Right.
would take policy. Indeed, that's what happened in Europe. As I said, they were the same as us in the 70s, and the governments took it upon themselves to start mandating paid vacations and paid holidays in substantial numbers. And that's what caused it. And unless we can get our act together, which certainly is not going to happen in my lifetime in this country, we're not going to see any difference here. We're on the gerbil tube and we're going to keep on running, albeit we might switch to other gerbil tubes because of AI.
Yeah. Why do you think there's such a big coordination failure? Like why wouldn't you have some firm that mandates leave, et cetera, and that's a compensating differential and you could get people at lower wages, et cetera. Like why doesn't that happen organically? Why do you think there needs to be some policy that solves this coordination failure?
So let's say, well, let me give you an example, okay? What about there was a case in a fancy suburb in New Jersey where they wanted to stop having the parents spend all their times taking the kids to soccer, tennis, baseball, etc. Okay.
Yeah.
And they got together and agreed to do this. And of course, some of the mothers started saying, no, we want to do it and have the kids being the best in violin, the best in soccer. It's very hard to get an agreement when one or two people will benefit from violating the agreement. It's the same as I don't know if you're familiar with Al Roth's stuff on jumping the
Yeah.
gun.
I
Okay.
got his new book here,
You got a new book.
Moral
Okay.
Economics. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
You got
Oh,
Moral Economics. It's on repugnant markets.
okay. Well,
Yeah,
I mean, this is a slightly
yeah,
different point of his, but I mean,
yeah.
there's another example. I mean, somebody is always going to cheat because it benefits him or her, even though it hurts society as a whole. And the only way you can make something that benefits society as a whole, if some benefit from cheating, is to mandate it, which in this country, since our government at the federal level doesn't do anything, as far as I can tell, that ain't going to happen.
Do you think this extends to other things that people don't like about work? Like, is the hedonic wage model just a little bit less useful than it's presented in economic one-on-one? Like risk at work, danger and stuff like that. Like, that's another thing that is bad
It's
for
paid for.
people.
No, it's compensated for. It's just not
Yeah,
compensated very well. I mean, we
yeah.
do show in one of our papers that uh, working a 4-day week, same number of hours, people do benefit from it, and they pay for it in the form of lower wages. All these compensating differentials, sort of extra pay for doing dirty work or less pay for doing very desirable work, are there. They just are not very large. I think the reason is because there's often some overhang of unemployment. I mean, Marx wasn't totally wrong talking about the reserve army, the unemployed. I don't like to use Marxian terms, and certainly it's not as stark as Marx put it, or even today's pseudo-Marxists, but it's there. These wage differences do arise. They just aren't very big. That's all.
Another thing I wanted to ask you about. I mean, I love what you have done with time use surveys, time diaries. And it got me thinking, as we're all thinking about AI, if you were running OpenAI, would you be engaging in time diaries? I feel like I'd want to see, if I were running an AI company, I'd want to see how people spend their time working. I'd want to know I'd want to know it minute by minute.
I would love that. Okay.
Yeah,
I would love to get my grubby paws on some data on that. The
yeah.
problem is, and this is what's quite amazing, it is very hard to get data from these surveys on what people are doing while they're working.
Why is that?
You're asking people to record minute by minute what they're doing. And if you're recording minute by minute, it's very hard to do anything. There's another example of this. Okay. One other method of getting time diaries is the so-called beeper method. So you
What is
attach
that?
a beeper to people, large number of people, and randomly beep them to write down what they're doing. And the problem
Yeah,
with that, and if you did this for everything, can you imagine being beeped during sex? That would certainly spoil the act for you. And the same thing is true
yeah.
for work. It would spoil it there too. So I don't see any great way of doing this. We used to have time and motion studies. This is something from the 1920s from so-called scientific management, where they would watch what people were doing and try to streamline it. That's fine on a job, which is a mechanical job, or even a job in a retail store. But I don't think that's true for the 20 or 30% of white collar people.
Yeah, yeah. No, good to know. I mean, there are companies out there like Humro, APT Metrics, et cetera, that track what people do, observe them, take little notes, sit in the corner. I don't know what they do, but they I guess try to understand the components of the jobs. I think they were the ones that did this for Onet. Um, but it's not very good, not very detailed. And we don't really know what people do in their jobs, which seems like a big gap in labor economics.
But that's not labor. Come on, everybody's studying labor. I mean,
Yeah,
look, I mean, if you
yeah,
ask anybody, what does a lawyer do in her job? They would have a clue. You ask, what does a professor do in her job? They would say, well, they teach 12 hours a week, maybe, or 6 hours, or 3 hours, whatever it is. And
yeah.
that's all students ever thought about me. And yet the actual teaching and maybe holding a few office hours, is a small fraction of the time I spent working. And it's very hard to quantify this unless it's something which is quite mechanical. And in terms of me, for my most important part of my work is getting a new idea or solving a problem. When do I do that? My best time is when I'm running in the park.
So if this is really so difficult, how should we think about, our ability to understand how AI will affect work? It seems like we'd have to know the components of the job, what people do. And if we don't know that, are we just in the dark? How do you think about it?
Yeah, we're in the dark and we can then trace it out later on and see what happened. I'm
Yeah.
giving a talk, a keynote at a conference next week on AI. And since I worked on the issue of what time of the day people work, I'm talking about those results, but I also got to talk about AI. So what am
Yeah.
I going to do talking about AI? The answer is I look at occupations that I think might become AI intensive. And there is a very nice quarterly survey on that about what workers say they're using AI. Take those occupations and look at how they, compared to other occupations, would fare over time if AI came in there. But this is total speculation.
Well, there's good speculation and bad speculation, and I would think, you have a valuable perspective as someone who's thought about work for a long time. So what's your speculation?
My speculation is that in the end, it'll be very little different from the introduction of the PC, which changed a lot of our lives. It cut the demand for certain clerical skills. It certainly made us more productive, people who use PCs a lot. It should have improved the quality of writing because it's much easier to revise things than it had been before. On the other hand, it's the same as seat belts. There's an incentive to become less careful because you figure somebody will catch it more readily. So, I mean, I might get the net, I'm quite sure with seatbelts is lives saved. And the net here is better written work, but it's not 100% gain, that's for sure. I hadn't thought of that example of the seatbelts and AI, but I think that's rather cute. It's a way of thinking about it. It's going to make us sloppy.
Yeah, interesting. And are you concerned about the pathway to learning and development? Like if people, use AI as a crutch, are they going to develop less and learn less?
Does the development of the hand calculator kill off our ability to do arithmetic? Or, as my sister, who's a math instructor, says, no, that saves you from doing the dirty work. You can do better work by thinking about the mathematical concepts. I don't see why this should be any different from that. People get bored. I get bored quicker than most, and they want to do different new things. And I think that will circumvent your concerns about the routinization of work activities because of AI. I expect it to routinize things and allow us more time. I'm a real optimist about this, as I am about
Yeah.
most things.
So let me bring up another hot topic for you.
Sure.
Remote work. What do you think remote work does to the beauty premium?
Uh, well, remember, actually, we had one very neat result in our new paper, one new paper, that remote work actually, work time during COVID, despite what you might think, got more centralized in the main part of the day. You'd think people would want to work any old time given the diversity of their interests. But remember, if others are working at the job at a particular time, unless you work totally in vacuo, independent of
Yeah.
anybody else, you might be a novelist, fine, you work whenever you want. But if I'm working in a firm that involves other people, I may well be having to work more at the same time than I usually did than less because they are. And that being the case, if I'm working with them, my face is still on the screen as we are here. I don't expect it to make much difference in the role of beauty.
Well, I mean, height is not observable anymore. That's one dimension that
Height's another aspect. Height is not the same as beauty at all, and weight doesn't matter very much unless you're really obese or utterly emaciated. But a normal person, 18 to let's say 30 body mass index, doesn't make any difference. So no, I don't think much of a difference at all. Of all the effects of remote work,
yeah.
that ain't going to be a biggie.
Yeah. Interesting. So I would think that there's always a concern about like, is beauty actually reflective of beauty, or is it picking up on other information? And I would, yeah. What do you think? Like, what non-beauty information is contained within beauty, and like, is that a big part of it?
So I've thought about this an awful lot. I've thought about it just right
Yeah.
this week because I'm possibly getting involved, even though I keep on vowing, stop me before I do any more beauty research, but I think I'm involved in another one. I mean, there are
Yeah.
three main methods of measuring beauty that we use in the literature. A
Yeah.
personal interview face to face. When we're done by this, I'm going to give you a rating 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm not, but I could. I could
Sure.
look at a picture of you, or what some people do is they try to measure it by very detailed facial measurements, symmetry.
Yeah.
But
Sure.
none of these things, the picture has a problem because it can be affected by how you look. The symmetry, there's more to it than that. There's a very well-known economist who I would say is average looking, even though her face is very symmetric. It lacks a certain je ne sais quoi. And the problem with the face-to-face thing is it's very hard not to be affected by the milieu in which you look at the person. In other words, I see that New Yorker picture on your wall, and I see, gee, it's a pretty good-looking guy because he has this wonderful picture of Central Park right near my house, by the way, looking at the pond. Okay. So
Right. Our background is
it's
part of
part of
our
our
real
lives,
estate.
okay? I mean, I've tried when I've done pictures, uh, I've tried to separate each picture out from each other one being rated, so there's no intervening milieu that might be screwing it up. But yes, it's as I've said since I started doing beauty in '92, uh, it's in the eye of the beholder, and yet there's tremendous correlations across people if you ask them to rate people. And I think that indeed, if there weren't, there would be no effective beauty because it wouldn't be a definable concept.
Sure, but like all of that, let's say all of that is totally true, and there's this, agreed upon standard for assessing someone's beauty.
No, 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 no. It tend to be agreed upon, not
Yeah,
agreed
yeah,
upon. Okay,
but there's
sorry.
still potentially more information within that. So let's say you have some theory that, beautiful people have access to, more elite groups and, successful people, and then hang out with successful people and learn from them, etc. Or, there's a sort of mating, it's,
Yeah.
what have you.
Look,
So you're actually maybe picking up on some socioeconomic status or
no, of course.
education or something.
Of course, that's the case. I mean, this is one thing that affects every aspect of your lives. And those aspects, such as hanging around with people who can refer me to better jobs and so on. Yes. But again, in all the research on this, I and others try to extract out from those other things the fact I might get more education, the teachers may pay more attention to me, abstract out from those, I may be more
Yeah.
self-confident, and simply what is the effect of the looks per se after abstracting from all those on the outcome of interest, be it marriage, probability, earnings, promotion, blah, blah, blah.
So I'm curious then if so let's say there's two components to the beauty premium. One is causal. It's directly attributable to pure attractiveness, and the other is picking up on a bunch of covariates and like
Yeah,
other stuff that's associated with it. My guess is that in a remote work world, we have more ability to present ourselves in a nice little frame, and we can manipulate our perception a little bit more. So the pure beauty effect would be
more
lessened to
dominant.
some degree, but all the covariate stuff would still be there basically to the same degree. Do you think that is plausible?
I'm not so sure, but remember, those covariant things have all happened already. So I'm sitting here, all you see is me in our second bedroom, which doubles as my office. But all the things that make me such a superstar, which I'm not, have already been affected by my beauty or lack thereof.
Right.
So I don't think that even there it's possible to abstract from these things. It's already happened. Embedded in us before we get on the screen talking about our coworkers or anybody else.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's baked in.
Baked in. That's a great term. Yes, I like that. Thank you.
So I wanna get your reflection on economics, labor economics in general as a field and where it's going. Because I know you've thought a lot about this.
Yeah, I have a lot. I'm a curmudgeon, okay? I mean, at this point, one of my friends in Germany, co-authors that he's now called a senior professor. My feeling until I wrote back to him, I made up a German compound word for somebody age 82 like me who's out of it. I'm a brain dead professor. That's a new title for senior people. Okay. Anyway, it's just a
Senior
speaking.
curmudgeon.
It's a senior
Yeah,
curmudgeon. I
yeah,
don't think I'm atypical of other senior people. I have a lot of friends I work, co-authors I work with. I think they seem the same. I find, and I'm happy to have myself quoted on this,
sure.
the typical paper is find something exogenous, show that X precedes Y. Isn't that fun? It often will have a title, blah, 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 colon, evidence from, which is the most
Yeah.
mindless thing I've ever seen. I would like to know, even in those studies, which basically can't get a lot of stuff, I'd like to know what is going on that leads X to affect Y. Okay. We had a paper, another nice little paper by some guy presented last week, where he showed in a country that the dispersion of cell phone coverage affected an outcome. And there could be several ways to do it. He had not thought about trying to infer which of those ways was causing the outcome. I mean, how can you have an effect in the world other than showing Y precedes X precedes Y if you want to change that, unless you can figure out why X is affecting Y? And so
Yeah.
I think we see an awful lot of that's all we see is does the X precede Y? We see very little thinking about what's going on. In other words, there's very little economic thinking here.
A few weeks ago, Tyler Cowen wrote a sort of obituary for price theory. Do you think price theory is dead?
Oh, good grief, no.
Okay.
Not at all. I mean, you're asking the wrong guy on that. Look, I was a Chicago undergrad. I took
Yeah.
grad classes. I took Milton Friedman's graduate price theory class my third year in college. Okay. I absolutely believe that. I wouldn't be talking about compensating wage differentials, which we talked about, which is a pure price theory thing. I wouldn't be talking about why it is that weekend work and night work is done more by people with low incomes if I didn't believe in price theory.
No,
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 it's quite
I'm
wrong.
not saying we shouldn't believe in price theory. No, I think it
We don't
is
pay
like,
attention to it anymore.
yeah, yeah. Yeah. What I really mean is like, do you think the field has forgotten about price theory
Yes,
in a damaging
absolutely.
way? Okay.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. It seems like it's in decline in academic economics.
If not, I mean, I've said all along, if you write a paper that could be done by a sociologist who is really good at using stata or R, you shouldn't be doing it. You're not doing economics. We have something better to offer. Namely, we have our analytical tools, of which price theory is the number one by far. So if we're not using price theory, we might as well just call ourselves sociologists, not bother teaching this stuff in grad school. Leave people
Yeah.
alone. Let them run their regressions. They'll be happier. And, if that's all we're doing, that kind of missing that in school or what we do is not going to harm the world. I think it'd be a disaster, not just for the economics profession, but for the world as a whole, because I think price theory, the notion that prices affect behavior, that's the fundamental notion, and that they affect behavior even in cases where there's no dollar directly assigned to it. Okay.
Yeah.
Ignoring that means we don't contribute very much to society. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry to rant about this, but
No,
boy,
no, no. Yeah. Yeah.
I've
No.
thought about this a lot. It drives me
Preach.
nuts, but I'm by no means atypical among more senior people. Indeed, even some people, I won't mention which one, who've been very much behind. Let's look at this causation stuff and let's make sure that X affects Y. I've talked to him a couple of times about this over the last 25 years, and he says he'd like to see more theory in the stuff. The problem is doing theory is hard. Getting a data set, finding a natural experiment, running a regression of Y against X and a bunch of covariates and looking at what happened. That's easy to do.
Yeah.
Pardon me. No, this is nasty. Sociologists can do that too, but they
Yeah.
can't think about the role of prices and behavior. That's what we do disproportionately or should be doing.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think another point in support of what you're saying is that it allows us to answer some big questions. I mean, I know our mutual friend Mike Grossman l likes to say it's better to be first and wrong than last and right. And
Absolutely.
I think
And
when
but
you
it's better, but no,
yeah.
it's better to be first and wrong than first on right on something that's so narrow that all you can do is say X precedes Y.
Yeah,
I'd go
yeah, I
further
think
than that.
that that's really what he means, even though it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek thing. I think the real question is like take, take your best shot at something big and something important than than like get, such fine-grained precision on a small question. But just to take the counter argument, just even though I agree with you for the record, now, you know, fields that have not undergone this like causal identification credibility revolution, or so it's called, have had big replication crises. Could it be that an obsession into very very clear identification of causal parameters has allowed us to not have this replication crisis that has plagued psychology and other fields?
Really? So you mean if I show that a program to improve the quality of water in wells in southern Uganda unequivocally has a causal effect, have I learned very much? This is an issue called external validity. And
Yeah.
so, are we going to go doing water wells in every section of every African country before we agree it? You know, people are not lab rats, okay? And
Yeah.
as long as people are not lab rats, the only issue is, have you cooked up something interesting that those of lesser ability can replicate elsewhere if they want? But the notion of replicability, I find another red herring in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
The same
Interesting.
problem in psychology. These are not using lab rats. So, for example, I was just writing something, going over a paper which should have been published long ago. It's a sore subject, by the way. And people measure the effect changes in inequality, and how
Yeah.
you measure various things affects the outcome. Does that mean it's a replicability issue? No, these are different ways of defining the problem. And by defining it in a lot of different ways, we might get a general consensus. So, no, I think that's quite wrong too. Okay, it ain't going to happen. Sorry about that. That's another thing which is, I think, of somewhat of a waste of time. If an idea is really important and wrong, people will follow it up, and their other example will show that. Take, for example, the what's his name, Rogoff thing,
Ken Roga. Yeah.
15 years ago on government spending and debt.
Oh yeah, the effect of debt to GDP on
And some
on growth.
unheard of
Yeah.
grad student tried to replicate it and showed it that basically made a very stupid, simple mistake.
Yeah.
Okay. Another example, long before you were born, but it made it into People magazine in 1980, which is probably before you were born.
Yeah.
Okay. Marty Feldstein, may he rest in peace, had shown that Social Security displaces private saving 1 for 1. Okay. The paper in the Journal of Political Economy. At the time, some obscure economist nobody's ever heard of, had ever heard of, pointed out that he'd made a coding error. So in fact, the effect was below a half. And I think Marty was written up in People as loser of the week after this came out in the papers. Okay.
Harsh. Yeah.
Exactly. So, but again, the only reason the guy tried to check it is because it was an important thing, which happened to get a lot of publicity as well. So that's why. But I'm not worried all about replicability, because if something's really important, people will replicate it in more or less, catch errors in it or replicate it and show it is or is not correct. But correct even there, you can be correct in one example, but if it's not correct in 10 other examples, if it's not externally valid, to use the current phrase, you haven't shown very much.
Yeah, yeah, I think you're right that our concept of replicability really has to mean external validity. It has to
It
it has to mean
does.
external replicability. It's
But
not
that's
sufficient
fine.
to, yeah,
That's fine in a field
yeah,
like physics experiments, maybe. It's fine if you have strains of genetically pure rats in a biology laboratory, but that's not going to happen in the social sciences, and I can't expect it to happen.
yeah. So okay, so since you brought up long publication times and wanting to get a paper out, do you think that in economics there's a much longer lag in getting a
Yes,
paper published
I
than
had a
other
paper on
fields?
that last year. You might have
It,
seen that.
yeah, is this a way to protect incumbents?
Perhaps it's a way to allow the incumbents to choose those who will become incumbents along with them. But given that we have tenure, at least in some places we still have tenure, why should I, as an incumbent, be worried about protecting myself? My job is safe, or when I had a job, it was safe. I was
Yeah.
tenured very early on, and I never worried about tenure. So the question is why we take so long? No, it's a different sort of low-level externality, namely that for some reason in our profession, we've gotten to the idea that referees should go over papers again and again and again, and authors should be spending huge amounts of time responding to every single referee's question. Most of the time spent that takes in this back is in the back and forth, and as authors writing responses to every single point the referee made. Okay, it's a disaster. I mean, I know full well that
Yeah.
resubmitted papers are often shorter than the responses to the referees on the comments in the previous version. And that's one problem. They've been trying, there were people worry about this. They had an international commission of editors which said we should do this, that, or the other thing. They were basically very namby-pamby things that I'm quite certain will not make any difference. Everybody thinks the one thing that does make it faster is in economics, we've gotten the habit at most journals of rejecting things out of hand, which if you're only going to publish 5%, I can't see wasting referees' time on all 100% of submissions. That helps a bit, but at some point you're going to get a paper which is refereed, and maybe there's I like to see more versions, and you go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. This particular paper I mentioned, we sent it to one journal, got 4 referee reports. They said no. Sent it to another one, got 2 reports. They both seemed to like it. We wrote a response. It sat with one referee for 6 months. Eventually, she said the people did not cite X, Y, and Z, 2 of which were unpublished by the same author, who in my mind must have been the referee. We
Yeah,
tried it
that's
elsewhere,
a clue.
got it back in 3 months, make these changes. It looks pretty good. Send it back. It took 5 months to get it back again, which was 2 weeks ago, which is
Is this
ridiculous.
is this a stable equilibrium, or do you think we'll
It's been
move
stable
off?
for the last 30 years. I don't know how
Yeah.
long stability can last. I don't see it changing.
Yeah.
Again, I mean, I'm very, I mean, they're good. There's a few good things about being really old and not really needing to deal with journals, although I do constantly, is one of them. Because I mean, the situation these days is terrible. My favorite story on this, my first paper in a major journal, the Quarterly Journal of Economics, okay, the so-called top 5 journal. Sent it
Yeah.
in October of 69, got it back in January 69, make a few changes, send it back in February. It was accepted. It was in print in August of 70. That's 10 months from initial submission to in print. Now, in print
Yeah.
doesn't matter very much because now everything is put on the web in final form right away. So if that had happened there, it would have been available for everybody in final form in March. That ain't bad. 5 months from submission initially. And yeah, these days it doesn't happen unless you're in the sciences.
Yeah.
The Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, to which I submitted in September of 04, had 2 go-rounds with me. It appeared in the February issue of the PNAS. That's the way to do business. The sciences do that. We don't at all. And we in economics are the worst of all social sciences by far. And we're killing ourselves.
Yeah. Why do you think economics is different in that way? Like, why aren't other fields taking
I
a long time?
don't, I've had friends who are editors of journals in other fields, psych in particular, and what they say is if we want something, we'll say, make these changes, get it back. If you make those changes in a satisfactory area, we'll accept it. If not, you're done. Whereas here we'll go through 3, 4, occasionally, very rarely, even 5 rounds. And sometimes the fourth round will kill it as well. No, everybody thinks he has to be the edit, has to be a co-author.
Yeah.
And how we got to that ethos, I don't know. It didn't used to be that way, as I indicated. How to get off it? How do you get off a hamster wheel unless you can convince enough people to jump off? And we haven't been able to do that. Sorry
Yeah.
with the hamster wheel again, but it's a nice analogy for bad things.
Totally. Yeah. So I got one more question for you.
Sure.
And thanks so much for your time.
Of course.
Um, if you had another 82 years of research, what would you be most excited to work on?
I thought about that one too. Hell, I'll take 10 more at this point. I'd like to do stuff that we talked about, time use stuff, but we actually see what people are doing. I think that would be, in terms of the AI stuff and other things, very, very valuable. The problem is one has to go out and either get some company to agree to this or go out and get grants. And at age 82, I certainly haven't the energy to do that. Indeed, I have not applied for a grant since I was 65 because my wife told me then, Daniel, you often get grants that require you to do things you don't want to do. We don't need the money. Stop it. Okay. And I've been married for 60 years, so I listen to what she has to say. Okay. Anyway, there's your answer. All right.
All right, fair enough. Dan, thanks so much for a fascinating, wide-ranging conversation, and it was a pleasure having you on the show.
Take care, Ben. Thanks for having me.
The Economics of Work is brought to you by Revelio Labs, workforce data for research and benchmarking. If you enjoyed, please remember to rate, review, and subscribe. It'll help us reach other curious listeners. I'm your host, Ben Zweig. Our producer is Cole Wagner. Thanks for listening.